Thank you, Brother Maurice Mahan. I'd like to say a very special thank you to young Faith Jenkins reciting such riveting history and truth and poetry. Her mother who brings her out here faithfully. And let that be a call to others in television and radio land. Bring your children into Rainbow Push. You need to go to school. That's where you're going to get your primary foundation of education. You need to go to Sunday school where you can get some character education. Then you need to come to Rainbow Push so you can have some civics education. This way you can see how things move. God doesn't want us to depend on him for everything and we do nothing. God gave us a hand. At the end of your wrist is about the most dependable hand you're going to ever have. You put this hand in God's hand, then you're going to move. You heard the words of Mr. Ballantyne before I give my remarks. I'm going to ask that he come back and introduce two of his other colleagues because there could be some questions about what does Rainbow Push do? What keeps us alive? Where is our fight? Like, what's relevant about the organization? And with Mr. Ballantyne, I just met these men this morning, just a few moments before I came in here to see you. This is how my day can start at Rainbow Push. This is how we get involved in an issue, because the Freedom House doors are open and we embrace our men that have challenges and men that want to fight back, families that want to stand up. This is a home, this is Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King's workshop. The struggle is not over, and we're not going to complain about what hasn't happened. We're not going to be mired in despair on what doesn't work. We're going to make a difference. And so for all those spirits that come out that want to make a difference, Mr. Ballantyne, please come and introduce your colleagues, because we're going to have some action as it relates to what's happening to these men. And I'm going to follow up on my message from last week on Father's Day. This is Father's Day in action. We need more than just one day to discuss what happens to black men in specific. Come on, Mr. Ballantyne.
Thank you. Thank you. First of all, I'd like to bring Bobby, who's one of the coordinators of Warehouse Workers for Justice, and he's the reason that we're where we at in this case right now. So I'm gonna let him speak for himself. Come on, Bobby.
Hey everybody, how's it going? I'm Bobby Frierson, Workplace Justice Organizer with the Warehouse Workers for Justice. I just wanted to let you guys know where we were with the Walmart situation. We filed a discrimination charge with the EEOC, and we're waiting on them to get done with their investigation. And if the EEOC doesn't take up the charge, we'll be filing a suit against Walmart in the federal court. That's the only update I wanted to give you guys. And I wanted to bring up another worker from Walmart, LaShawn Chardon, just so he can tell you more about him.
Good evening, people. May God bless you all, too. You know, I was on my job for 2.5 years. And people, I've learned to be a responsible member of society. I've changed my life all around. Got married. And for them to come and do this to us, you know, it hurts. It really hurts. You know, didn't tell me, like I said, really applies 60 days. Like Mark said, what's going to change? You're not paying attention to what I'm doing today, but you went all the way in my background. You know, but you ain't looking at what I was doing today with my life. My life has changed. You know, I am a responsible, productive member of society today. You know, I stay out of the way. I stay out of the way, but I don't understand how could you tell me I can come back and work for you as a temp. It's still a third contractor. It's the same as what you done. You didn't want to give me my benefits. You didn't take all this away. I can't. I'm going to fight these people to the end. I promise you. Thank you.
Give these men a wonderful, loving round of applause. You can be seated. I want you to feel the pain that they endure, that they go through. And it seems like in this country, the blacker the man, the more hell they catch. Last week I spoke about our history, our pain, and our hope. Furthering along that discussion, our history. This is the 400th anniversary of Africans in the America, having been kidnapped and brought to these shores, having fought in every battle, in every war in American history. Why do I have to say that over and over and over again? Because young brothers and young sisters, you are Americans. You are full-blooded Americans. And when you have a sense of entitlement, and I mean the positive sense of entitlement, reclaiming and knowing what is yours, not being denied your rights, you cannot give me my humanity. I've always had it. Someone has tried to take it from me. But when you know you're God's child, you won't be confused. I won't thank you for stop abusing me. I'm going to put an end to this. 400 years. We have something that happens in America where there's racism on one side, where there's a body of people that believe in racial superiority. That's different than a group of people that are indifferent to history. And that is also different from those that are ignorant of history. Some people are just like many of us. They could care less about history. Where's mine? What's this? What's that? There's a body of whites that believe that. Then there are some that are just ignorant of it, don't know why there's an African American History Month. Some of us need to be reminded, why do we have African American History Month? Because not everybody black and everybody first belongs in African American History Month. This was the idea of Dr. Carter G. Woodson that he created right here in the city of Chicago in Bronzeville. He was 20 years of age working in the coal mines in West Virginia when he was able to finally go to get a high school education. He was a brilliant young man and then went on. His parents were descendants of those that had been born into slavery. After he was able to get his GED and his high school, he then went on to college and ended up getting a PhD at Harvard. The first African American who had parents that had been born into slavery to get a PhD at Harvard. But what did he find when he got to Harvard? He did not see any history of blacks making any contribution in America. He says we've been deleted from the pages of history. This was not history, this was distortion. This was not history, this was propaganda. His goal was to make American history whole and truthful. So he started chronicling all the details of blacks and whites making progress together. It wasn't a first Negro this and a first Negro that. It was about progress. He wanted to see progress. He also had envisioned a date and time when we would no longer need African American History Month, History Week, because history would have been made complete. So at the Rainbow Push, we want to make history complete and tell the whole story. Our pain is real for 400 years. If the Queen of England and the President of the United States can get together and celebrate D-Day, talking about Normandy and the invasion and how World War II was turned around and how we've made great progress and how there was a Marshall Plan in place. Why can't we talk about Selma on the day that we got the right to vote? When our forefathers fought in a war abroad for the French that they did not have the rights for at home. When you talk about 400 years, and the federal government is not planning on doing nationwide education, we are drowning in ignorance in our country. 400 years, you can see the unbroken continuity of black men having been cheated and robbed and exploited. This is not by coincidence. This is a long-standing American tradition and practice. This is 10 times longer than baseball. This is 100 times longer than apple pie. This is 100 times longer than the NHL. This is American history. And until we wake up and understand that, from 1619 to 1865, 246 years, you've been denied the right of an education, denied the right of land, denied the right of fatherhood, of manhood. You've been stuck in boyhood for 400 years. I'm putting it into perspective, brothers and sisters. So when you understand the depth and the length of it, I want this to empower you, because I feel good about today. I'm glad to see, and I say it with a tongue in cheek, the things that everyone is able to see now that the President of the United States is doing. Why do you say that, Jonathan? This is the same sort of vicious and malicious racism that's been odorless and colorless. Now it's being exposed. It's not being hidden anymore. I'm glad he's on the stage where the world can see what we go through. When everybody is smiling, tongue in teeth, with all these caps and veneers on their teeth, walking across presidential stages, and everybody's Botoxed up, and everybody's grinning and trying to get to a fish fry to talk about what we can do with Negroes. And as soon as they get to the White House, who are we? We got to get to the back of the bus again. No. No, we got to go forward. We got to also know the history in South Carolina. That was the first state that made it illegal for a Negro to be able to read. And if a white man was caught teaching a Negro to read, he got lashes. It was state law. That is why the state of South Carolina has more prisons than they have higher education institutions. That's why we have more African American men in jail than we do in college. It was state law. Why do I want you to know this history? Because when our children really know who they are. I was in Decatur yesterday, and I heard this sound on the PA system in the restaurant, and I'm talking to a young child that was now being labeled a delinquent and a juvenile, and he had his teacher and his counselor, two very nice young white ladies that were working with this young Negro boy that they said was despondent and had behavioral issues, and he was on his last chance. When I sat down at the table with them and them, I said, let me come talk to you. Sit over here with me at another table. I'm Mr. Jackson, what's going on? He says, well, I got some problems. I'm like, what kind of problems you have, Reverend Pastor? And he says, because of some choices I've made early on in my life. I said, now what choices and problems have you made early on in your 17-year-old life that you can't fix right now? They were beating into his head that a 17-year-old child was a juvenile delinquent and was supposed to get ready to start going through the back door of America. I said, look at me. I know you. You just got one issue you have to resolve. Are you going to change your attitude? Do you have a destination in mind? And I want to leave you with something to think about, young man. I don't want you to think about where you fail. Where you fail is where you are. That's down. I want you to think about where you slipped. Don't tell me what happened. Think about when you stopped doing what you were supposed to do. Remove all of those factors. Get back onto the main road. Observe the stop sign. Know the green lights. Know the yellow lights. Know the red lights. Pause at the intersection. Obey the rules of the road. Go forward in your life, young man. There's been a consistent history of denying Negroes work in this country. This is the 100th year anniversary of the Red Summer of 1919 to 2019. What happened? Don't go to sleep. African Americans, 90% of our population was in the South in 1917. African Americans that fought in the war, they were highly skilled because when we're coming out of slavery, we had to run the farms. We had to run the plantations. They didn't want a Negro to learn how to read. Why? Because once you learn to read, you can learn, once you learn to read, you can learn to lead. They didn't want you to get too much education. But in order to have the plantation more profitable, to make less work for the owner of the plantation, you wanted the skill of the slaves to be increased so you could put more responsibility on them. But once they learned how to assume the responsibility and organize, they could run it for themselves. By 1917 and 1919, when African Americans started fleeing oppression, discrimination, and lynchings that were unsolved in the South, they started moving up to Arkansas, moving up to Memphis, coming up to Chicago. And then those ethnic groups, the Italians and the Greeks and others, they started seeing us as competition in their labor force. This is when the race riots broke out, when a young black child was floating down by an imaginary line on the lake that God created right here in Chicago. They said the Negro child floated into the white section of the lake. They stoned him and killed him, and the black community came out. Race riots ended up breaking out all around the country because black folks were seen as a threat, a competition to take on white labor. Jump forward. When you look at the local unions now, and welders and heavy equipment and operators and so forth, that is why you don't see blacks that have companies operating the heavy equipment and having the labor companies and being able to do the mechanical work. When we came up, they started closing down the apprenticeship programs and said you need a certificate for this and you need an authorization for that. And then they moved the facilities out to the suburbs and cut off the transportation. And then they started excluding you. And before you could show up, you got to have a card. Does a Negro have a card to go to work? When black folks started getting into the horse races and the jockeys, we were winning the Kentucky Derby. Then what did they do? They created white jockey clubs and white jockey associations. And then before you knew it, all the blacks that were jockeys had been excluded. Look what they did with horses, brothers and sisters. The jockeys used to be famous until they were black. Then they had to find a way to honor those other than black. So they ended up congratulating not just the owner of the horses when they became white. And then when that was no longer true, they started honoring the trainers of the horses when they became white, because the Arabs started owning the horses. And then they started celebrating anybody but us. This is the 100th year anniversary of the Red Summer of 1919. This is our history. So when these black men come to Rainbow Push today saying we've been denied and we've been excluded, I will fire you because of your background, but you can go back and work for another temp agency that can rehire you. They were working for the Walmart Corporation. The Walmart Corporation has over $500 billion in sales. It's the nation's largest corporation, over 2.2 million employees. 51% of the stock is owned by the Walton family, the wealthiest family in America. What used to be good for America was good for GM. In the 1970s, General Motors was America's largest corporation. Wages were $18 with defined benefits and defined contributions. You could get overtime work. Now the nation's largest corporation is Walmart, and Walmart is made primarily their goods in low-cost and slave labor markets around the world. Now what's good for Walmart is not good for America. Unbroken continuity. So when these men get fired, they get laid off. It pains me when they say, and our hope, that's our history, but our hope and our pain that we've got to fight. When they get laid off talking about, he went back 37 years into a man's background. Lord have mercy. 37 years into a man's background. For work? Is this the same Walmart Corporation that does not pay women equal wages? Is this the same Walmart Corporation that got $30 million to locate on the south side of Chicago like they locate in every other urban part of America, and they get paid to come in to a community to undercut organized labor? Is this the same Walmart that unions have to build their facilities, but soon as they make their money, they let the low-cost Walmart locate in their neighborhood and stick the full-price bill in the black community? Let me make that clear again. They will get paid union wages to build in the black community by law. But then the laborers that do the work live in a neighborhood that has a Walmart that doesn't use union employees to make their goods. You can look at it in every city across America. You've heard the debate this past week on reparations. We cannot have an authentic discussion, as my father, the Reverend Jesse Jackson, says about reparations until we understand the predicate. We have invested and been denied. We have been damaged, and now what do we want? Repair. If you steal something from somebody and you lock people out and you overcharge them for car insurance and you overcharge them interest on mortgage, if you hurt their credit score, if you deny them all the equal access to education, you've been damaged. What is our hope? Our hope is that we as a people, we're not going to complain about what we don't have. We're not going to fix the blame. We want to fix the problem. Having reparations as the discussion is towards fixing the problem. What could reparations look like? Now, you know and I know it's not going to be one check to solve it all. But here's my hope. When I look out on that NBA basketball court, and I look out on that football field, and I look out on that baseball diamond, I am confident in the resilience of my people. When you take the stumbling blocks out of our way, we can win. When we get factored into the growth of the nation, what does that look like? When we have access to high quality education, we're going to catch up and succeed. Someone would say, well, that's not true. My God, when you see a Daddy Williams take his daughters in Compton, all Daddy Williams had was a book, a man that taught himself and created two of the greatest tennis players in world history. I know we can win. When I see a young brother, Leonard, coming from Compton, going on to play in Canada, when they tried to break him, what happened with Mr. Leonard in San Antonio? You gotta know this, ladies, gentlemen, please. This isn't about the basketball and the score and who won. I'm talking from another angle. I'm talking about seeing life on the court. This is a microcosm of what happens in society. Popovich and others in San Antonio and the doctors and the team owners, they told Mr. Leonard, you have to play. This goes back to the hollow sound of slave breaking, don't it? He says, but I'm hurt. They said, no, but you've been cleared. They thought he had an attitude problem and said, no. Then we're going to get rid of you. You go to Toronto, which isn't in America, you've been banned from the league, essentially. You've been shipped abroad because you have no family up there. You have no friends. Every time you travel, you have to use your passport. So you're not supposed to win in Canada American basketball. But he said, I'm not playing until my knee heals. He went up there because he had been essentially kicked out, moved away. You know how they sent slaves to Jamaica from America when they had a bad attitude? You send them back there to get broken, to retrain them so they can come back another way. I can't go into every aspect anecdotally. He went there, fully healed, and now he's come back a champ. Mr. Jerry Reinsdorf, and when you go into the United Center, you'll see a jersey retired for Mr. Jerry Krause. Jerry Krause never played basketball. He was a team manager, a little short, fat guy for the Bulls. But Mr. Jerry Reinsdorf said, I owe the success of this organization to Mr. Jerry Krause. Why? Because when Michael Jordan played his second year and hurt his leg, he benched him for an entire year. That is what laid the foundation for him to have repeated and a long-term successful career. Look at the Chinese player Yao Ming. They kept pushing him. Every time he got hurt, every time he got cleared, they pushed him, and he repeatedly stayed hurt. They broke him. When you get a Kevin Durant that plays an entire career unblemished and unhurt, these men have one of the finest skills in the world, moving and running at their pace and shooting at their speed. And the team owners and the team coach and the team doctor clears him to play, and then he tears an Achilles heel. Something's wrong with that. When they do that to Mr. Klay Thompson, something's wrong with that. I'll tell you what's wrong with it. That's how you do slave breaking. You want a Negro to get out there and make you some money. Run, boy, run, until you're breaking grown men in parts and little bitty pieces. The men get hurt in the prime of their career. They played high school ball, courtyard ball, neighborhood ball. But now when you're surrounded by doctors and physical therapists and gyms, you get broken? I tell you the truth. Horse owners don't do that. You see a horse limping, they take him out, heal him up, send him in the pasture, let him come back at another time. Our hope is we need to come together, young men. I want these men at the factory and the warehouse workers, you got to come in to Rainbow Push. And I want others that can hear our radio and our TV voice, you got to come in. Our hope is to see a new generation of young men and young women that are highly educated, that's full of character, that have some courage, that are willing to fight for their rights. This isn't about Jesse Jackson's fight and what he says and doesn't say, and what somebody elected office says and doesn't say. And I ain't got no leader, and I'm my own self's leader, and I posted something on Facebook. I tweeted something one time. I went on Twitter another time. Everybody knows how I really feel because I'm a real man. Ain't nobody seen you do nothing. I'm tired of all the people talking about if this don't happen or else what? When you gonna show up and join the fight for all of our rights? All these chihuahuas just barking, everybody just barking. You look at the president, he's just barking. He ain't going into Iran. Why you say that, Jonathan? I'm glad you asked. First of all, he doesn't understand the calculus of it. Now, I've taught math. When you start dealing with differential equations and the integrals and other things, I would have to sit the president down to deal with him, not in mathematics. I would have to take him to arithmetic. The addition, subtraction, multiplication, and if it got real good, we may get to a little bit of division. When he looks at these artificial lines that have been created in Iran, he's looking at the country, but what precedes the country is the religion. When you got the Shiite and the Sunni and the Shia, if he hits Iran, you've hit the Shia. The Shia controls the grounds in Iraq, in Syria, in Jordan, Oman, Qatar, Kuwait, and in Saudi Arabia. They're all going to get pulled into a war. That's the difference between understanding the derivatives and functions. But that's the latter chapter of the book that he doesn't qualify to even get to, because you got to go through. I am so honored to be here to talk about our history, the pain of our men, and our hopes for the future. And ladies and gentlemen, in closing, I see God moving in our time. And ladies and gentlemen, I see the best of times ahead of us. There's not going to be too many more days of you being able to lie. Your history is speaking for itself. I want the presidential candidates to stop talking about all what they've done for civil rights. You would do better and be more authentic if you say, I've made some mistakes in my life. Have some contrition. Say I wasn't on the right side of that issue. But you can't lie on your history anymore. It's well documented. It's on Wikipedia. It's in Encyclopedia Britannica. It's on YouTube what you said when you did what you did. You can't smile and grin your way out of this. Black folks have been given a bad bill of goods for too many years. And you're not going to be able to go through South Carolina talking about what you did for civil rights. When did you get arrested for civil rights? What was the cause that you stood up for someone's civil rights? I don't mean you went down to Selma and Birmingham when we go across the Edmund Pettus Bridge and you use your sharp political elbows to get in front of the political workers that worked for SNCC and CORE that actually marched, that were civil rights workers, skinning and grinning at the front of the line. When did you sacrifice anything for civil rights? When has it ever been denied for you civil rights? Martin Luther King had been arrested 29 times fighting for civil rights, indicted and stabbed. My father's been arrested over 40 times fighting for civil rights. I find it, Reverend Patterson, highly insulting when a politician that ain't never stepping out of a back of an SUV, air conditioned, with a clean white shirt on, smiling and grinning. I'm sick of it. I see our hope. The truth is coming out. It can't be denied. We paid the price. We are deserving. I'm so proud of the young people that showed up for reparations. When my father talked about it in 1988, it was called a fringe issue, and it was a joke. What does Jesse Jackson really want? When Mr. John Conyers first put forth the legislation, they said it's too big, it's too far gone, it's too old. It doesn't mean anything. And my God, a young child, now a scholar and a great man, my God, in the spirit of James Baldwin, my God, a young man from West Baltimore where life expectancy is 20 years difference, 5 miles away from West Baltimore, going over to Johns Hopkins University. My God, a young man who stayed on the straight and narrow, who had aspirations one day of being somebody if he could just make it to Howard University. Did you see Ta-Nehisi Coates stand up there and answer Mitch McConnell? Doesn't Ta-Nehisi Coates deserve to be in the U.S. Senate and not some babbling man from Kentucky? A man trained at Howard University. I don't know what happens at Harvard, but they haven't produced a Coates yet. You can give that a round of applause. A man that's going to speak unadulterated truth to power. Ladies and gentlemen, we are in for the best of times on our hand. Don't you know we have a new mayor in the city of Chicago? Don't you know black women are running this city at the county and the water reclamation and at the state's attorney's level? Don't you know there's a black woman running the state's attorney's office in Baltimore and the police union are going to attack her like the police union is going to attack Kim Fox, like the police union is attacking the black woman in St. Louis, Missouri. I need some men that want to stand up. Ladies, you've done enough. We're going to organize some men to show up. We're going to confront Mr. Snyder and the Walmart going on, taking on all this government work and concessions and don't want to pay the workers. Can you see what can break a man? When you go back home, after you've lost your job, after you have no food, when you don't have bus fare to get anywhere, when you don't have any more gas in your car, when somebody tells you you did something 10 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, and you see the thieves and the crooks walking out every day when they fight for Me Too, and you see a Charlie Rose and a Matt Lauer and all the rest of them walk away and they handcuff and arrest a Bill Cosby, something's wrong. When you've seen Michael Jackson in your lifetime in handcuffs, when you've seen James Brown in your lifetime in handcuffs, when you've seen Muhammad Ali stripped of his glory and honor and his titles, when you've seen our best and our brightest being tried, being driven into bankruptcy with Prince and others, don't you see the pattern? When you see a network can just snatch Mr. Harvey off at whim, you don't find that peculiar? Our history, our pain, our hope, our only hope is to vote. We've got to go forward and not backwards. We've got to come out not just on Monday through Friday in school. You got to go to Sunday school for some character education. And I encourage you to come to Rainbow Push, tune in, get involved for some civics education and action.